All right. Hello, my loves. Welcome back to Soul Love. Welcome back to my channel. If it's your first time here, I'm Mafalda, and on this channel, I dive deep into the twin flame awakening, and I offer guidance and wisdom, teachings to assist twins on the journey as a fellow divine feminine. It is absolutely aligned with my soul's blueprint and mission to assist as many twins as possible in allowing their soul to descend into the human vessel, to anchor union frequency, and to shift the templates of relationships, love, and abundance here on planet Earth. So sit tight. Today's video is actually a transmission. That's how I designed it. That's how I co-created it with my higher self and divine intelligence. I did so in a way to open up the possibility for you to calibrate to the frequency that I'm radiating in this video in order to experience shifts in consciousness that will allow you to see your own journey and locate where you're at on the journey without fear, without attachment to the 3D or fantasy timelines, but rather from a higher level of consciousness, from the soul blueprint level, with a macro level understanding of all that is unfolding for you. So the intention is set. This is a topic that has been widely discussed in the twin flame community, separation stages, including reunion stages, and what some teachers have called pre-union. However, it's mostly addressed and talked about from a 3D level of consciousness or a linear level of consciousness. These stages are outlined as though they neatly and orderly progress from one to the other, and the duration of each stage is almost implied to either be linear or the same for everybody. And of course, we know that is simply not true. This is a non-linear journey because this is a higher consciousness journey, and it's a journey of spiritual mastery. And of course, all these realms exist beyond time and space, beyond the linear rational mind. And so this video is going to offer a higher dimensional perspective on the stages of separation and reunion. I'm going to just offer you an overview of the different stages that I've outlined. And if you're interested, then I can go a little bit deeper. We'll see how this video lands. I do have some notes with me today just to make sure that I mention everything that I prepared and that came through prior to the recording of this video. So please bear with me. And I do hope you enjoy this video. I hope it helps you shift your consciousness and experience instant knowing and downloads about your journey, because that's what happens with quantum healing, with quantum level consciousness shifts. So without further ado, let's first lay the foundation. I've already started talking about this, but I want to make sure that it really lands and that the message really comes across. So this video is about dismantling the linearity of the stages of the journey, with a particular focus on separation and reunion. And this is a journey that is multi-dimensional and complex. It is very nuanced. And therefore, the linear perspective, mindset, or framework is simply not enough to really do justice to the different stages of the journey and the alchemical transformational process that we go through as divine feminines and divine masculines. And also, it is important to establish, as part of the foundation for this video and for this transmission, that the duration of the different stages, or even the duration of the separation stage, the larger separation stage, does not equal level of mastery. And I think this is a really important point to make, because we've heard it everywhere across the Twin Flame collective and community, through different coaches and teachers. The goal and the focus is always on healing, evolution, and growth. And it almost invites this assumption that once there's no more healing, or once we've grown or evolved enough, then union will manifest in the 3D. Then it'll just happen naturally. And of course, there is some level of truth to this statement, but it is grossly incomplete. That is not true. Why? Because there are multiple factors that play into how long separation is. And those factors include past life trauma, the intricacy of the karmic entanglements that both you and your twin got yourselves involved in here on Earth and prior to coming to Earth, specific missions that require separation, certain cycles that need to play out before union becomes possible in the 3D, discrepancies between the two twins. We are perfect mirrors for each other, but not from a 3D level of consciousness, not in the 3D realm. We are perfect multi-dimensional mirrors for each other. That means that the level of trauma that we've incurred, both on Earth and outside of Earth, can really differ. So it is possible that one twin is ready for union while the other one isn't, in which case the pre-union stage, for example, would be longer for this pair of twins, which again, it doesn't mean that this pair of twins is less masterful. It actually may even mean that one of the twins is very masterful, or that there's been a soul contract level agreement to separations of certain duration or for certain reasons. Sometimes the more experienced a pair of twins, the greater karmic clearing and template restoration they would have signed up to do, which means that it might take them longer to find their way back to each other in the 3D. It'll also depend on the number of lifetimes you've had in separation that also may differ. So as you can see, there's so much that can go into this, and it's so important to shift out of this 3D level of thinking that union is somewhat of a prize or a reward for complying or for being a good girl or a good boy. That's not how it works at the end of the day. So I hope that this video and the continuation of this video may also help you to anchor in that knowing, so that you can trust your path, trust the periods of silence, trust the separation stages, knowing that you're doing nothing wrong. Yes, it's possible to delay, but at the same time, if you're not ready yet, you're not ready. And again, that might be true for both you and your twin, or just one of the two of you. So without further ado, let's get into the different stages that I've outlined here. I also want to squeeze in a little disclaimer and remind you that this isn't the end all be all. These are not set in stone. This is what came through to me. For me, again, this is non-linear. If you have not experienced every single stage, don't fret. That's absolutely okay. You might not necessarily experience every single stage that I'm about to discuss. You also might experience these in a different order. They may bleed into each other, or they may overlap, and they might happen back and forth. Of course, there is an overall sense of progression from the early stages of separation to stabilizing in coherent union frequency and energetic, and the energetic field is stable, it's coherent, and we're operating from our higher self and our soul. So from one end to the other, there is of course a general progression. It's a forward moving journey, but how we get there is not linear. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, you're not going to experience an early separation stage right at the end in pre-union, right? However, you might experience multiple ego deaths or multiple dark nights of the soul, and you may find that one stage was very short for you, whereas another was very long, or that the same stage kept coming back in waves. I feel this is in fact what is the most common, is that the same stage keeps coming back in waves, and the mind simply does not know how to place it, or how to categorize it, or how to place it within a sequential order. All right, so let's do this. Let's get started. I have here 9 stages that I outlined today. Again, these are just guidelines. Of course, do not panic if you don't see yourself exactly in these stages. So, first, early separation stage. So this is the initial fracture. It's often triggered by an event or things, a loss of control, either an event or a series of events. It doesn't necessarily have to be dramatic, although it may well be. And it's always after soul recognition has taken place. It might be soon after, it might take a little while, but there's an initial fracture, that point where we first go our separate ways, and it can be quite violent emotionally, psychologically, etc. So this is the point where the initial emotional and psychological wounds start to surface. These wounds tend to pertain to childhood, attachment trauma. So here, our attachment styles from a psychological perspective really come to the surface and are revealed. It tends to be that one is anxiously attached and the other one is avoidantly attached, or perhaps disorganized in cases of more severe trauma. This is also what is commonly referred to as the initial dark night of the soul, when we are thrown into deep pain, the grief of separation, the soul shock of feeling like we've been ripped apart from each other. Again, this might be more or less severe or intense. And these are the first layers of personal healing, but here there's still a lot of confusion about the journey itself, a lot of questioning about the journey, going back and forth in terms of this profound questioning. What is happening to me? Am I going crazy? Why does this person affect me so much? How could this happen? How did we go from the honeymoon phase to this fracture? All these reflections and thoughts may be swirling around in your mind. The mind's super activated and there's a lot of pain. This is when separation is at its most acute from a lower level of consciousness, not necessarily of the whole journey, but from a lower level of consciousness. We may or may not move into a period in which we experience 3D reunions and a lot of confusion. This is where we may loop, we may cycle between contact, retreat, and collapse again. This is when we may have more or less 3D contact or contact in the physical realm, but these reunions won't be coming in at a 5D level of consciousness. So we'll still be navigating 3D to 4D levels of consciousness and vibrational frequencies. And this is why the union doesn't it doesn't stabilize, and it is not sustainable, and eventually there is a trigger or multiple triggers that end up catalyzing another collapse or another stage or period of silence or separation. This is when the field is highly unstable and the energetic intensity of the connection is at an all-time high, but from a lower level of consciousness or at a lower vibrational frequency. This is when the connection feels very addictive. These are push and pull cycles. However intense they may be for you at the monadic level, they may not be that severe or intense. This also depends on soul history, of course. This is where you may experience false reunions. You think they're coming back in for good, only to see them leave again. And this stage, as I've mentioned, can be quite confusing. Once we've realized that perhaps we're not as far along on the journey as we may have wished for, or our ego may have wished for, is when we experience what I call the most violent ego death. So this could be a second dark night of the soul. It's another wave of healing that starts to come in. And this is when the shadow work really intensifies, especially with karmic entanglements, past life trauma, and multi-dimensional trauma and wounding that starts to reveal itself. This is what I would call the true descent into the underworld. This is the point when we realize that there's no going back, and that it's not going to be that easy or that simple as performing readiness or doing a little bit of surface level personal healing. It's just not going to be enough. We're in it for the long haul, and we may experience at this stage profound waves of grief, of helplessness, hopelessness, and despair, feeling like the journey will never end. And this is when we're going to start realizing that having them in the 3D or having physical contact actually does not mean union. It does not mean readiness for union, and it doesn't fulfill us in the way that maybe we thought it would. Because again, our counterpart is in their wounded state, and we are also still very wounded. So the connection isn't the same as that pure essence level vibrational frequency that we experienced at the beginning during the honeymoon phase. We may have glimpses of it, but it's so ephemeral, right? We can't hold on to it. And so we start to realize, well, I might as well go deeper, because I don't even want this type of relationship. This is so 3D, even though this is my monadic counterpart, right? So this is when themes of poverty, betrayal, sexual abuse, memories of torture, forced separation, timelines of forced separation really come to the surface. This is when we start to become aware of the karmic entanglements at a deeper level. This is when we're really being called to elevate. In the previous stage, we may not even have realized truly how much of an up level this journey is to the traditional spiritual growth that we may have been used to prior to realizing we were on the journey. This is when we start to realize, okay, this is going to take me to the next level. And even the spiritual practices that I had before aren't going to cut it, aren't going to cut it. This is also when abandonment wounds get triggered, feeling abandoned by our counterpart, realizing the magnitude of the work that we're going to have to do, and realizing that we're going to be pretty much alone while doing it. So that triggers that sort of abandonment wounding, betrayal wounding, feeling like our twin has really left us alone in this whole process. And also because they haven't been triggered enough into their ego collapse, it does seem at this stage that they're having an easier ride than we are. So that resentment can also build in this stage. But this is also, the good part is, this is also when our spiritual gifts start to get activated. We start to get more and more downloads about the journey. So it's sort of clinking. Of course, this all comes in waves, and this knowing isn't static and it's not permanent, but we are starting to realize that we're going to have to up level when it comes to our work and our mission. And of course, the first signs of that are coming in through those same psychic abilities, downloads, mission work, getting visions of what we're meant to build and create from the higher level of consciousness that we're anchoring and coming into. Which leads me to what I would call stage 4, which would be the nervous system collapse and the karmic grid collapse. So this is when it really becomes physical. You may have somatic overwhelm. The multiple karmic timelines that you may have been feeding unconsciously start to collapse as well, because of course your ego has gone through a couple more deaths since the previous stage. And so all those timelines that pertain to your lower mind or your egoic self have to collapse. And that happens through the nervous system. It's not outside. Outside is, of course, the illusory perception of 3D, and we're having a very real experience, but the collapse happens inside. So you may experience very strong ascension symptoms. This is when you may feel a lot of nausea. You may stop eating. You may start timeline shifting and quantum leaping, as I said. Your light body goes through a profound activation at this stage. And then the karmic grid dissolving. This is when you really are led to take different actions. So within the dynamics you have at work, within your family, with your friends, you're going to be invited or perhaps forced to choose differently and to exit those timelines, those versions of yourself. This is also when sacred anger starts to rise, when you depedestalize your counterpart, when you start to allow yourself to feel the rage. You start to realize that the human self, your counterpart's human self, was far from enlightened or conscious and may have acted in very unconscious, unaware, even disrespectful ways. And because we've reached a point where we've realized that we're in it for the long haul, there's no point in pretending anymore. There's no point in performing, because this isn't as simple as I'm going to be a good girl and boy and do all my inner work and all my healing, and they're going to be there at the end as my prize or as my reward. And so you realize that feeling anger, depedestalizing them isn't actually going to jeopardize your chances at union. Quite the contrary, it is an absolutely essential step in your empowerment and in reclaiming your spiritual sovereignty on this journey. So that happens at this stage. You will then move into what I call the void or recalibration stage. This would be stage 5. And this is when you're going to start feeling your nervous system rewiring post-collapse. You're going to go through identity dissolution. So even spiritual identities or personas, or even work that you may have done, even if it was aligned prior to this twin flame awakening, if it's not aligned with your highest potential or with your soul's blueprint, which lies in the 8th dimension, then it will have to go. So those identities will dissolve. Even the spiritual good girl or good boy persona will have to go. This is when we also experience ancestral purification. We start to heal maternal and paternal lines, so deeper healing that is more expansive and that has a wider range of impact. And this is vibrationally speaking. Of course, this is also usually when our counterpart starts to enter their collapse, because it is exactly when we start to finally start to enter a place of what is the initial stages of neutrality, which feels like void. That's when they have finally enough space to enter their collapse, and that's when you'll see them if you have contact with them in the 3D, or you'll feel them if your relationship is purely in the 5D and above, or 4D and above, let's say. You will feel them almost go under or sink deeper. This is a stage that is wildly and widely misunderstood, because it's when we feel that we're emerging and that we're finally feeling more stable. At least we're not in that deepest pain, and then we're expecting them to rise right away, and they seem to be sinking even deeper. So this stage is wildly and widely misunderstood. This is when we enter neutrality, because of course, through our nervous system collapse and rewiring, and the collapse of all those karmic timelines and lower timelines, we've been able to start setting boundaries to come into greater self-love and self-respect. We've started to feel our way through the sacred anger. So at this stage, we are able to set boundaries. This is when we're no longer chasing or pursuing. We're no longer pushing. So the energy feels a lot more stable, a lot more peaceful. And we'll also go through a cellular reset. This is also the rise of the third energetic field, when the sacred divine intelligence that exists between twins really starts to come online for us. So yes, then eventually we enter what I would call, and what other teachers have called, the pre-union stages, which would be a stabilized separation. So you're still in separation, but you've come out the other side from the deepest, most painful parts of separation. You're stabilizing in inner union. You are more aware of what your unique abilities and gifts are, and mission is starting to really come online strongly. You've started to take steps toward that, because you've collapsed all those old karmic timelines. You're starting to rebuild and to make choices that are soul-led, and they're in alignment with your highest timeline and with the union timeline. So you're starting to see shifts in your work, in your relationships, in the place where you live, in your finances, etc. So this is a lot of recalibration. Again, pre-union doesn't, not again, because I haven't mentioned this yet, but it's important to note that pre-union doesn't mean that union is going to happen within days or weeks or even months. Again, this journey is non-linear, and these stages are non-linear. So you may be in pre-union for years, let's say even lifetimes. It's important to let go of the notion that these are supposed to last a certain amount of time or a certain period of time. So during pre-union, the counterpart, the divine masculine or the divine feminine, if they're the matrix twin, the 3D twin, will be going through their collapse and their healing process. This particular video isn't focused or directed at dissecting or analyzing their process, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. But the feminine or the spiritual twin, the 5D twin, stabilizes in neutrality. This is when the parasympathetic nervous system becomes your baseline. And of course, your light body is activated further. You experience further DNA upgrades. And as this is happening, you may actually feel very empty. You may feel emotionally flat at first, and this is because your nervous system is going into coherence and it's exiting survival mode. So it's upgrading to house and anchor and radiate more light. You're going through all these DNA upgrades as well. And at first, it'll feel very unfamiliar. And it may feel, again, like boredom or like emptiness or just very flat. This isn't a sign that anything is going wrong. This is a sign that you're anchoring a higher baseline vibrational frequency and station of identity. You're basically starting to live from peace as opposed to chaos. And the nervous system needs time to adjust, to not live in constant fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. This is when mission alignment deepens, and it's the anchoring of 0 point energy. 0 point energy being the God seed, divine consciousness, the monadic level of awareness that comes in through the higher heart, the eighth dimension, right? The eighth dimensional level of awareness that we're really aiming for on a monadic journey, to be able to come into herogamic, multi-dimensional union. This may take a while. Please bear in mind, it may take a while, and you're not doing anything wrong. If you feel flat, maybe you even feel like you don't care. This is when some people may even experience a soulmate timeline. I'll go into that in another video. Stage 7. The 5D reunion window. This is when you can feel the shift in the energetic field between you and your counterpart. There is a lot less longing. There's a lot less desperation. You're feeling a lot less of their guilt or shame bleed through. You're anchored in your sovereignty and you're empowered. And so you have boundaries, and they start to come back in a more peaceful manner, a more respectful manner. So it's the 5D window opening when you'll feel the silent pull. They'll come in through dreams. They might test the waters energetically speaking. This is when synchronicities start to pick up again and they'll accelerate. Your creative flow will return. You'll have mission clarity, and you'll start to have the motivation and the inspiration to start taking steps toward accomplishing the mission. And you're living from a place of absolute unconditional love. You don't demand that they come back, but you also don't reject them. You know you don't need them to accomplish your mission or to anchor higher consciousness in this lifetime. You know that. And so there's a non-urgency that comes from anchoring a non-linear level of awareness and perspective. So energetic and DNA upgrades continue, a refinement of your spiritual abilities. Your soul remembrance will be also very intensified. You may remember very specific details about all the wisdom that you carry from previous lifetimes and other star systems. And your wisdom and your mission really become multi-dimensional. You become claircognizant, your intuition sharpens, etc. Which leads us to stage 8, which would be stabilization and coherence. This is when you start to stabilize the union frequency within, and they also may be coming back in the 3D plane. Again, this is non-linear. This might not exactly happen in this way or in this order. It may not take this exact amount of time, or maybe one counterpart comes in the 3D during the stage I outlined, stage 6, or maybe only in stage 9. You see what I mean, right? So this stage is when you're operating from coherence, soul alignment. You have anchored 5D level of consciousness or above. You're living from your soul blueprint, so you can experience pain, you can experience challenges, obstacles, but you don't lose your sense of self, and you know who you are. You're not living from the human identity anymore. You're living from your spiritual self, from your divine self. 3D life starts to rearrange to make union possible. This is when you start feeling more abundant. A lot of opportunities may start to come in. Again, this may happen at different stages. You may have already experienced a lot of abundance in previous stages. This isn't black and white, of course. Both twins are expanding their capacity. The field is extremely alive, and the relational field starts to become safe and coherent, not just the energetic field, which leads me to what I would call the last stage, coherent, multidimensional union. This is when union becomes possible and starts to anchor or is anchored in the 3D as well. So across dimensions, including the physical realm, including the 3D, and it's built on coherence, field coherence. This looks like sovereign partnership, no karmic looping. There's no fusion or enmeshment, but there is a multi-dimensional merge. And there is a stabilized mission architecture because the timelines have converged. Both have anchored their highest timeline, which is the union timeline. And so the next steps of mission are revealed and the whole architecture becomes much clearer. And then, of course, you embark on what is the beginning of the rest of your journey, the beginning of anchoring union in the physical realm and shifting the templates for relationships and for life on earth in general. So I do hope that these stages have helped you find or locate where you're at on the journey. But again, not from a linear perspective, not to encourage projection, not that you start anticipating union in the 3D, but so that you can see where you're at and cultivate deeper self-reflection so that you're not constantly looking to the outside or to external sources to tell you where you're at on the journey. And in that way, you deepen your relationship with God, with divine guidance and divine knowing. And that's the goal. The intention is to help you do that and help you experience the consciousness shifts that will allow for more divine wisdom to come through for you. So I do hope that you've enjoyed this video, that you've enjoyed this transmission. Do let me know in the comments section below if you did, if you are experiencing any of these stages, if you resonate with this framework or this mindset, this way of looking at the different stages. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you'd like to also share your journey to help others, and so that others may see themselves in your experience. Of course, that is so welcome and appreciated. All that you share, all your contributions are truly appreciated. It really warms my heart, and it's what helps me to keep going. I hope to be able to come back with more videos, and I hope to be able to anchor in a more flow in terms of the frequency of the videos that I'm sharing. Alas, if you do want one-to-one personalized private guidance, I am, of course, open to sessions. So if you feel called to receive that extra support, to receive divine guidance, to have a space to help you connect with your higher self and to also help you locating yourself on the journey, of course, don't hesitate to reach out. I love to help twins on this journey. It's really such a delight. And if you haven't already, please do like and subscribe this video. It is absolutely my intention to keep growing the channel and this community to reach more and more twins. And my goal is to also eventually do a membership. I was asked by one of my clients to create a membership so that we could perhaps meet a couple of times a month and we could do live Q&As, energy work, talks, lectures, seminars, I mean, all kinds, sharing circles. We could work with multidimensional portals and astrological transits. So I would love to do that. I just need to get the community or I need to grow the audience a little bit more so that we can have at least a few of us to justify meeting a couple of times a month. If that is something that you're interested in and that you'd like, then please do let me know as well, and stay tuned because it will come. So if you could help me grow the channel, I would very, very much appreciate it. All right, I won't take up more of your time. I hope you enjoyed this video. I wish you a lovely, lovely day. I love you all, and I send you a warm, warm hug.